Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 3, Controlling Intersite Replication using site links and Bridgehead servers. In this video, we will continue with a scenario from last time where we had already created two sites, and we will go ahead and create links between those two sites. So this will be the first objective of the video, to create and configure the site links. Then I will show you how to create a backup replication mechanism just in case if the first link fails. We have a backup way of replicating between our two sites. You will also learn how to schedule the replication between the two sites. So we're going to talk about scheduling intersite replication. We will then optimize replication using what is known as Bridgehead servers. And then I'll show you optionally how to create what is known as site link bridges, and also to create connection objects. And last but not the least, we will define what a global catalog is, and I'll show you how to configure a server as a global catalog. So let's first talk about what are the different replication mechanisms and how you can optimize them. So going on to the next screen over here, there are two types of replications: intra-site, intra within the site replication, and intersite, between sites. So the replication can be within the domain controllers of the same sites. That is known as intra-site replication. In our case, going back to our network diagrams over here, to maximize this, the replication between DC1 and DC2 will be intra-site replication within the same site, and the replications between DC3 and the two other domain controllers, DC1 and DC2, will be intersite, between the sites. Now there's a huge difference between intra-site and intersite. The first difference is that the intra-site is completely automatic. There's a process known as knowledge consistency checker, KCC, which automatically creates connection objects between all domain controllers so that replication takes place between them automatically. Within the same site or intra-site replication, there is nothing to configure. It's completely on autopilot. Within 15 minutes, replication will take place, and any object that was created on DC2 will be on DC1 and vice versa. So again, within a site, there is nothing to do, and that is known as intra-site replication. Our focus will then be on intersite or between site replication, so that when replication takes place between the two locations, California and North Carolina, what can you control about it? Who will the replication take place between? And then when do you want the replication to actually take place? Remember, the two sites are connected by means of a T1 connection, which is 1.54 megabits per second. And also you must realize that Active Directory replication is just one kind of replication or exchange of packets between domain controllers or different types of servers within the domain benandbrady.com. For example, some of you may be familiar with DNS, the concept of DNS. DNS, you can have primary, secondary, or at the Active Directory type, and the DNS information must also be replicated between the two sites. In fact, the process is known as zone transfer. If you have Win servers, well, they must be set up as replication partners, and there we go. Another replication takes place. In this video, we will talk about global catalogs, and you should have a global catalog on each location. Well, there will be global catalog traffic as well, and so forth. What I'm trying to make a point over here is that there are different types of objects and information that must be exchanged between domain controllers in these sites. And if all this if all these exchanges were not tamed or not controlled, then there would be so much exchange of information taking place during during business hours between the two sites that there will not be any useful bandwidth left in order for you to actually do production on your network. In other words, if a user over here would like to access resources such as printers or files or other shares on DC3 or other servers on this computer, there will not be enough bandwidth available for the user to actually perform that activity. All user activity will actually slow down. Hence, it is important that we actually control inter-site replication. In order to do that, we need to follow the following steps. So let me go back to our notes over here. Next, in order to do this, what we need to do is create what is known as site links, and I will show you how to create the site links. In fact, one of the site links is already created for us by default by knowledge consistency checker, also known as KCC. And then what we need to do is configure the site link attributes. This is where you will say that, well, between the two links, use this link over the other one, or use this link at a certain time, and so forth. And then finally, what we will do is configure what is known as a Bridgehead server. This is the server that actually participates in the replication process, and configuring a Bridgehead server optimizes the replication of Active Directory. And then as optional steps, we can also create what is known as site link bridges, and we can create and configure connection objects. But let's focus on these three tasks first. First, we're going to create a site link, then we will configure the attributes of the site link, and then we will create a Bridgehead server. So let's do that. I'm going to make a connection to DC1, and then on DC1, let's start Active Directory sites and services one more time. Okay, I'm going to expand this, and I gave you a good tour of this in the last video. So those are our two sites. In this particular video, what we need to focus on is the mechanisms or the transport mechanisms between these two sites for Active Directory replication. So we really have to focus our attention on this container known as Intersite transports. I'm going to expand this container, and by default there are two different mechanisms or two different protocols that enable you to replicate Active Directory. The first one, and that is the only one that is used by default, is what is known as the IP transport protocol. This is the default protocol across which the two sites will replicate Active Directory. So between the two sites, we always assume that we have a TCP/IP network set, and IP will be used to actually replicate the traffic between site 1, which is California, and site 2, which is North Carolina. And by default, the site is already created. The link is already created between these two locations, known as the default IP site link. What I'm going to do is right click on this and then rename this so that we have a much more useful name for this. Just like we did for the default first site name over here, we're going to call this, instead of default IP site link, we're going to call it CA-NC link. Okay, so this is the link between California and North Carolina. I'm going to select this object, right click, and go to the properties of this object, just to show you what it looks like in the properties. So here we go. What this is saying is that this particular link, California and North Carolina, is actually linking two sites, California here and North Carolina. And these are the attributes that I'm going to configure in the next step. But just to show you that there are some default values already configured for these attributes, and we're going to leave it the way it is. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is create a backup link so that I can change the values over there and then compare this link to the other one, just to make a point as to exactly how the replication can be controlled between these two sites, California and North Carolina. So let's do the following. What I'm going to do is select IP, right click, and then over here say new site link, and as the name of the site link I will type backup CA-NC link. So this will be our backup link, and by default, because there were only two sites over here, they are already selected and put on this site, California and North Carolina. After all, to link or to draw a line between two objects, you need a minimum of two objects. So here we go, California and North Carolina are two sites. It's automatically selected for me. I'm going to click on the OK button, and we are all set. So here are our two links, California and North Carolina, which is the default link, and then the backup link over here is California and North Carolina link as well. Now let's assume the following. This particular one is using the T1 connection. So I have a T1 connection on this one, and this particular one I'm going to have as an example a dial-up connection, which is the 56K kilobits per second line between the two locations. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to configure the different attributes of these sites, or rather the site links. So I'm going to click on the backup over here, right click, go to properties, and then over here these are our two links that are already selected, or rather two sites already selected for this link. Now here are the attributes that you can actually control. The first attribute is known as the cost attribute. This attribute will determine which link should be used if both links are available. In other words, if I have both the 56K dial-up available and the T1 line available, obviously I want to use the T1 line because that's a much better connection and it's the most efficient and faster connection. I would like to use that. And you indicate that you prefer to use the T1 line by setting up the cost over here. The link with the lowest cost is the link that will be used if both links are available. Only if the T1 link is not available, then only with the second link, the link with the higher cost used. By default, the cost is set up as 100. Also, please remember that this is just a metric value. This has no significance. In other words, this does not mean 100 megabits per second, or does not mean, as far as the cost goes, $100 a month or $100 a day or anything like that. This is just a metric. By default, the metric is set to 100, and the metric is set to 100 by default on the other link also. So what we're going to do is increase the metric over here from 100 to 200, just to communicate with Active Directory saying that, well, this one has a higher cost link than the other one, use the other link first. In other words, use the T1 connection first. The next attribute to configure is what is known as replicate every. This is in minutes, and this checks for how long should the domain controllers on two sides wait before checking whether there is new information available on the other side, so that replication can take over. In other words, this is the wait interval between when replication takes place. By default, it is set to 180 minutes, which is 3 hours. So you can set this as low as I believe 15. Let's try that. 15 is the value that is set for intra-site replication. The domain controller is within the same site. Let me go lower than 15. Here we go. It doesn't allow that. Okay, and the maximum you can set is for a week, which is so many minutes. So what you're going to do over here is leave it as its default value of 180. Of course, you can change that. If you want to check every hour, for example, if you want to check every hour, let's leave it to 60 minutes. So the two parameters that you've configured so far are cost. In other words, which link will be used. The link with the lowest cost will be used. Replicate every, in other words, in how many minutes to check whether new information is waiting on the other side of the link. And the last one that you need to configure is what is known as the replication schedule. So to do that, you need to click on change schedule over here, and by default it is going to replicate at all times every day. Now if you want to replicate during non-business hours, and as I said, you should, simply because otherwise too much traffic will be taken over during business hours, what you need to do is the following. The first thing is I'm going to clean the slate over here by clicking on all and then clicking on replication not available. In other words, now I have a clean slate. Now I need to select exactly when replication should take place. So in our example, let's say that the office hours are between 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and I would like to replicate between 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning. So it doesn't matter what time it takes place, as long as it takes place between during non-business hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from here, see if I can find from 8 p.m. I think I'm doing okay over here. Select all this and then click on replication available. So it's available from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. that's midnight. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to select this up to, I believe I got 8 a.m. over here. There we go. And there we go. And I'm going to say replication available one more time. So once again, replication will take place in the blue bars over here. It will take place between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. Here's the midnight symbol, and this is the day hours. So replication will not take place during business hours, and that's how you set this up. I'm going to click on the OK button, and there we go. Those were the 3 parameters that we set up for this particular link. Now, let's compare that to the other link. If I were to go to the standard link over here, or my default link, which is the T1 line, I'm going to right click on this, click on properties, and over here again the 2 sites are selected. The cost is 100, the cost over there was 200. In other words, between the two, this link will always be used. And then over here, replication is every 180 minutes. If I want, I can go ahead and change the schedule over here also. Okay, I've showed you how to change the schedule. We will leave it the way it is at this point, simply because for the purposes of this lab, I would like to replicate immediately so I can show you the effects of replication between the 2 sites. Otherwise, you would go ahead and configure this as well. So those are the parameters that you need to configure for your replication to optimize the way replication takes place. So going back to our notes over here, let's see what we've accomplished so far. What we've done is created the site links. Then I've showed you how to configure the site link attributes. The next thing to do now is to configure what is known as a preferred bridgehead server. It is very important that you first understand exactly what a bridgehead server is. This is also a very important topic from the MCSE exams point of view. So let's discuss what a preferred bridgehead server is. Like we discussed before, you would prefer that the Active Directory replication crosses the WAN connection only once. So it should go from California to North Carolina once, and once it reaches on that site, then the domain controllers within the same site should participate in the intra replication method, and then they will get all the information that they got from the other side, and they will share it between the domain controllers on the same site. So in other words, the Active Directory traffic should cross over only once. Now in order to do that, you need to designate a server as a bridgehead server. So by definition, a bridgehead server is a server that participates in the inter-site replication of Active Directory. So in our example, what we should do is the following. We should configure DC1 as a preferred bridgehead server, and then DC3 as the other preferred Bridgehead server for the North Carolina site. So in other words, in the California site, DC1 will be the preferred Bridgehead server, DC3 will be the preferred Bridgehead server on the North Carolina site. So what will happen is the following. DC3 will replicate with DC1 and DC1 will replicate with DC3. Once DC3 replicates with DC1, DC1 and DC2 should replicate with each other so that DC2 will get all the changes that were made on DC3. Let's run this example in several different ways. Let's take an example of an administrator that has created a user account on DC2. So once again, the administrator created a user account on DC2. What will happen is now is the following. DC2 will participate in the intra-site replication with DC1, and this takes place within 15 minutes. So within 15 minutes, DC2 will give the information to DC1. DC1 now has the information. DC3 does not have that information. Now, DC1 and DC3 have been set to replicate at a certain schedule. Remember, we just set up a schedule for during non-business hours between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. for the backup link, and during all hours for our regular link. So DC1 and DC3 will wait until that time comes up. Once that time shows up, it will replicate. DC1 will replicate with DC3. If there were other domain controllers on the North Carolina site, or if you were to add additional domain controllers in future, DC3 will replicate the information with those domain controllers. Okay, so in this manner, the information that the new user was created on DC2 crossed the WAN connection only once. Only one time did it go from this way to this way. It came over here, and then if there are additional domain controllers, they would all find out over here. Let's try the same example from DC3's perspective. If you were to go over here and let's say you renamed a user's password on DC3, that information will be replicated between the replication partners. So it will replicate when the schedule hits at DC3 on between DC3 and DC1. So DC3 will give that information to DC1. The information is now on DC1. DC1 will replicate with DC2, and then the two of them will know. Let's look at it from DC1's perspective. Let's say that you go ahead and create a new organizational unit on DC1. That information will be replicated very soon between DC1 and DC2 because they are intra-site replication partners. And then when the time comes, it will replicate between DC1 and DC3 as well. So in this manner, all the domain controllers will know about the Active Directory objects that each one of them has. In fact, the Active Directory domain benandbrady.com is a shared Active Directory, and in this manner, all these domain controllers participate in what is known as a multi-master replication. In other words, all these domain controllers are masters. They all have read-write copies of the domain database, and then they share all the changes made to each one of them by synchronization or by replication among each other. Now, just a word of caution over here. In the MCSE exams, they want to know a little bit more in detail as to exactly how this replication takes place. In other words, they want to know that when a change takes place, exactly what happens on DC1, what happens on DC2, and what happens on DC3. I've given you the overall picture, but there is something known as push and pull. Push is when an object is actually sent from the object that has the changes to the object that wishes to have the changes. Whereas the pull is when the object that does not have the change pulls the information from the object that has the changes on them. In Active Directory, all the replication is in the pull mechanism. Let me explain to you exactly what happens. In order for me to explain this to you, let's run the example of an administrator trying to create a user object on DC2. So the administrator has just created a user object on DC2. Once that object is created, here's how the replication mechanism follows. DC2 will inform DC1 that there are some changes taking place. Once again, DC2 will not give the change to DC1. Folks, make a note of that. DC2 will inform DC1 that I have changes. Go ahead and go ahead and fetch the changes from me. DC1, once it knows that DC2 has changes, it will come and pull the information from DC2 to DC1. Once again, in Active Directory replication, everything is self-served. The server, the domain controller that has the changes, simply informs its replication partners that, you know what, I have a change, come over and take it. It is always self-serve, or it is always a pull mechanism. So DC2 informs DC1 that I have changes, come over and take the changes. So DC1 will perform a pull operation and get the changes from DC2, and now DC1 is now also aware of the new user that was created. Now let's follow this mechanism between DC1 and DC3. When the replication schedule hits, DC1 will inform DC3 that I have changes for you. This information will come across the wire over here on DC3. DC3 will then pull the information from DC1. If there are changes that have taken place on DC1, on DC3, again DC3 will inform DC1 that I have changes for you, and then DC1 will pull the information from DC3. The reason this is important to know is that sometimes what they do is they give you a match the following type of a question where you have several of these steps listed on the right hand column, and on the left hand column you have to put these steps in the exact order. So don't be confused when you see a question like that. Just remember, the server that has the changes simply informs all the other servers. It is the duty and the responsibility of the other servers to actually perform a pull operation and take the changes away from it. So that was a Bridgehead server. In our case, we're going to designate DC1 and DC3 as Bridgehead servers for the respective sites. In order to do that, we need to go back to Active Directory sites and services. So let's do that. I'm going to minimize these figures over here and go back to DC1. Now on DC1, what I'm going to do is expand the servers link over here, expand expand DC1, click on DC1. Since I'm going to make DC1 a preferred Bridgehead server, you need to select the computer object DC1, right click on it, and then go to properties. And here we go. This is how this works. Here are the two transport mechanisms available to us, IP and SMTP. And what we need to do is pick up one or both of them. In our case, we're going to pick up both. So I'm going to select both IP and SMTP and click on the add button. What this did was move the mechanism from here to here. And if you read this column, this says that this server is a preferred Bridgehead server for the following transports. In other words, if your replication is taking place either by IP or SMTP, this is the server that will participate in the inter-site replication. Once again, the definition of a Bridgehead server is it is a domain controller that participates in the inter-site replication. So in the California site, we have selected DC1 to be our preferred Bridgehead server. I'm going to click on the apply button, click on OK over here, and then do the same thing on DC3, which is in the North Carolina site. Expand this, select the server, right click, properties, and then once again for both mechanisms, we're going to make DC3 as the preferred Bridgehead server, click on the OK button, and then we are done. So from this point on, the replication partners are such. DC1 has two replication partners, DC2 and DC3. Alright, so DC1 has DC2 and DC3 as the replication partners. DC2 has just one replication partner, which is DC1. And DC3 also has just one replication partner, which is DC3 has one replication partner, which is DC1. So in this manner, replication will take place in the Active Directory using the following mechanisms. Now, let's make sure that all this is working fine in our network. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to minimize all this, and this time for a change, let's go to DC3. And on DC3, we're going to use Active Directory users and computers. Okay, and then over here, I'm going to go to a container over here. I'm going to go to California and quickly create a new user. So I'm going to create a new user over here, and let's call this user Jill Smith. The logon name is going to be J Smith. Click on next. I'm going to leave the password as with a capital P A S S W O R D 1. And then I'm going to leave these boxes unchecked. Click on next and then click finish. If you're watching the videos for both Server 2000 and Server 2003, please note that there is a tremendous difference between the domain policies in Server 2003 as opposed to Server 2000. Server 2003 is much more restrictive. You need to create passwords of a certain length, and your password must meet the complexity requirements by default. In Server 2000, I could have left the password as blank and it would not matter. Okay, so I created the new user on DC3. So I'm going to close this connection on DC3 and then go to DC1, and then let's make sure that we replicate all our settings. So this is the replication between DC3 and DC1, and it should give me a message that the replication has been queued, which is a good message. And then over here, it should take place immediately just because it's taking place between these two domain controllers, which is within the same site. So replicate now, here we go, it replicated immediately. I'm going to go to, also did you notice, here's the replication partner for DC2, just DC1, alright, whereas this one had both. Now over here, I'm going to simply click on replicate now. Once again, it will be scheduled. Look at this, this took place because of what you set up. Once again, let's verify this, and this would be a good summary also as to what we have done. DC1 has 2 replication partners, DC3 and DC2. DC2 has just 1 replication partner, which is DC1, and DC3 also has just 1 replication partner, which is DC1. All right, DC. So these are the 2 Bridgehead servers, and the replication is taking place between them. So I'm going to right click on this once again. I know I did it before just to make sure I've pushed it so that it actually shows up on DC1. Let's give it a shot. I'm going to go to DC1, go to Programs, Admin Tools, and let's see if this user actually has shown up so far. If not, we will just wait for a little while until the replication actually takes place. But here we go. I didn't have to wait. And the reason this happened is because if you remember, our site link was to replicate at all times, and I had selected it with lower cost so that this link is taking place immediately just for my environment. In actuality, you would actually schedule this during non-business hours, but then in that case, I would also have to wait. So I'm going to close this program, and we are done with setting up our, going back to our notes, we are done with creating site links. In fact, I also showed you how to create a backup link. We configured the 3 attributes of the site link, and the 3 attributes were the cost, in other words, which link will be used if both are available. The link with the lowest cost is used. The second attribute over here was replicate every, or you're basically telling the 2 domain controllers, the one that will participate in the replication process, for how long to wait to check whether replication will take place. Let me explain this a little bit more. Remember, our replication was during non-business hours between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., it's going to check for it every 3 hours because it was set for 180 minutes. And the last but not the least was the replication schedule itself. And the replication schedule was between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Also note, there is no schedule or no configuration that you can do for intra-site. Once again, there were 2 types of replication. Intra-site requires no parameters to configure. It is on by default every 15 minutes or less. If you want, you can push it also. Inter-site replication is the one on which you set parameters simply because you want to optimize your network traffic. Now, there are 2 other, then the third thing we did was set up a preferred Bridgehead server, which is the one that's going to participate in the replication process across the 2 sites. Now, a couple of other things over here that we need to set up, even though these are optional. Let me show you how to do them. Then the next one is what is known as a site link bridge. A bridge would be a way of getting to make sure that replication takes place even if a link is down. Let me show you that with an example. Let's say here are the 2 locations, California and North Carolina. Let's say that you were to set up a new location now called Illinois. So in other words, Ben & Brady has branched out, and now they have a 3rd location, Illinois. So I'm going to assume the 3rd location is right over here where I'm circling with my cursor. So the 3rd location is here, and then there is a link between California and North Carolina, and there's a link from North Carolina to Illinois, and the link between Illinois to California as well. Let's assume that for some reason, the link between California and North Carolina goes down. So you cannot replicate in this manner anymore. What will happen is replication will go through a link bridge. In other words, I can go directly, just like what happens during rush hours. If the expressway, the main expressway is jammed up, what do? You take the side roads. Same thing over here. I cannot go directly from here to here. So what I'm going to do is go from here to here and here to here. In fact, this V becomes a bridge or a site link bridge. I cannot go this way. I'm going to go from here to here and here to here. In other words, to create a site link bridge, what you're taking is the site links and then converting them to a bridge, saying that, well, if I cannot go directly, I'm going to go this way. This would be for fault tolerance purposes. Once again, it's optional. If you want to set it up, that's great, because in this particular case, you will ensure that replication actually takes place even if one link is unavailable. So in order to do that, what you need to do is go back to our domain controller, which is DC1, and in there we will run the tool Active Directory Sites and Services one more time. Okay, and then over here under Intersite Transports, these were our mechanisms. I'm going to select this, right click, and then I need to select IP because that's the mechanism that we're using. Right click, and then over here say new site link bridge. And once again, because we had just 2 links, it already selected the links for me. Look at the difference, just to show you what I mean by that. I'm going to right click on this and say create new site link. A site link links 2 sites. So when I click on this, it's going to show me the 2 sites that are present, California and North Carolina, and the site link is actually a line between the 2 locations or the 2 sites. So it is showing you the sites over here. On the other hand, when I right click on this and create a new site link bridge, what I have is the two links selected for me. So obviously you need to have at least two links to be able to create a bridge. And over here I'm going to call it link bridge, and then the two links already selected. I click on OK, and now the link will take place even if one of these links is down. Okay, in our case it doesn't make any difference, simply because there were just two links available in any case. If one of them is down, the link bridge won't work either. I know that, but at the same time I just wanted to show you how to actually create the link bridge. So that's one optional method of creating a link bridge. And going back to our notes, we need to do the last task over here, which is to create and configure connection objects. Now let me show you what they are and why and how you can do them. When you expand the servers container and then you click on DC1, this is your domain controller, which is in this side. And then when you click on the NTDS settings on the right hand side, what you're looking at is what is known as connection objects. This is a connection object that links DC1 to DC3. This would be the one that is actually performing the intersite replication, because it is going from DC1 to DC3. So when I right click on this, replicate now, here we go, it has been scheduled at the next opportunity. Click OK. So this is the connection object. Look at the definition. Connection object is the object that is actually linking logically in the Active Directory the physical connection between DC1 and DC3. So you need to click on it and then say replicate now in order to start the replication process. On the other hand, the connection object between DC1 and DC2 is within the same site, and hence it participates in the intra-site replication, and that's why you see this message. Now, these connection objects are created automatically by the process known as KCC, Knowledge Consistency Checker. What the Knowledge Consistency Checker does is it makes sure that your Active Directory can replicate between domain controllers in any manner possible. It will try its best to create what is known as a topology ring. In other words, it will try to find enough domain controllers that are partners of each other so that replication takes place automatically. It is an algorithm that is written as part of the Active Directory that makes sure that if there are multiple domain controllers, they will all get the Active Directory replication one way or another. And so by definition and by default, every time you add an additional domain controller to your domain, a domain controller object is automatically created for you, namely this one, and that particular domain controller object then participates in the replication process, and for that the KCC automatically creates a connection object as well. In other words, you do not have to create these connection objects. In fact, if a connection object is not created for you automatically, I would not proceed ahead. I would shut down all my domain controllers, restart the servers one by one. In other words, I would start the first domain controller first, let it settle down a little bit, start DC2 then, and then after a few more minutes start DC3, give it some time to settle down because KCC may be at work trying to find these connections, and then create these connection objects for you. And then finally what should happen is that all the domain controllers should have the connection object so that they can replicate with the other domain controllers in the domain. If however for some reason, if you feel that a knowledge consistency checker has not done a good job, in other words it has not selected the exact domain controllers that you wish, which again it should, but for some reason if you want the replication to take place between some other domain controllers, not the one that was selected by KCC, well, you can create a connection object. Or B, if the connection object for some reason was not created and you simply want to create a connection object and move forward, you can create a connection object at that time also. To create a connection object, you simply right click on the NTDS settings and say new Active Directory connection. Over here you simply select, let me just reposition the screen a little bit over here. So you want to select which particular domain controller that you want to create a connection object with. I'm going to click on DC3 for example, and then click on OK. Let me explain this a little bit more. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to show you how this diagram works. Since you were in DC1, you need to actually create a connection object between DC1 and some other domain controller. That is why when you right click and say create a new directory connection, it simply lists all the other domain controllers. I'm going to click on DC3 and click on OK, and it will create a new connection object for me, and I'm going to call it over here backup object, and then click on the OK button. I don't need this object, I'm going to actually delete it, but here we go. It actually created a new connection object for me. So in case this was not done automatically, well, you can create it yourself. And see the difference over here, it does tell you that this was done automatically. The other thing you have to note over here is that, and that is exactly why it lists this separately from this, or lists this differently from this, simply because now that you create your own object, this object will not participate in the algorithm of KCC. In other words, KCC will not consider this object and then set up and make it participate in its algorithm so that it can find replication partners for it automatically. In other words, if you were to set up these objects on your own, well, you're on your own to configure this configuration and make sure that you have configured all the objects correctly so that replication does take place among those objects. Okay, so again, this is optional. You do not have to set it up. If for some reason you do need to set it up, I've shown you exactly how to do that. I'm going to delete it now. However, if I were you, I would make sure I shut down all the domain controllers, bring them up systematically one by one, give them some time to settle down, make sure that you can ping all the domain controllers, just make sure there is no connectivity issue. If that is the case, if you have no connectivity issue and you still do not see these connection objects, let the servers run for a while. Okay, let it run for an hour if need be. You will see the connection objects will actually show up and your domain will work perfectly well. I'm going to close this and go on to the next topic of our discussion over here. Going back to my notes over here, the last thing was a discussion on what is known as a global catalog. For this, I've prepared a different screen. You need to understand clearly what a global catalog is and how to create what is known as a global catalog server. So let's first define what a global catalog is. A global catalog is a central database of information about objects in a tree or a forest. This is a central server that basically has a lot of information. It has complete information about all the objects in the domain in which it actually exists, and it has information about other domains or other trees within the forest so that your searches go faster. One of the reasons why a global catalog is used is so that when you're trying to search an object in the Active Directory and that object happens to reside in a domain in which you are not actually logged on to, your searches will actually go faster. Let me give you an analogy for this. Let's say that you go to a public library and you're looking up a book, and if you do not find the book on the shelves, what you typically do is you go to one of the computers over there and perform a search. In the search, the results of the search will tell you whether that book is actually available in the library, and if so, where to go exactly and find that particular book. If the search comes up empty, in other words, it says that either A, the book is not available, or B, the book has already been borrowed, then what you can do is the search will tell you that, you know what, I can locate this book in a different directory or in a different library. You can do that kind of a search. So what the search will say that, well, there's a library that is 5 miles away. You can either go and pick up the book, you can reserve it right there, or if you want, you can actually send a request and the book will actually be sent to you. In other words, all the books, all the information about the books in all these libraries were linked by a central system. The system knows about everything about the library that you are at, and if it does not have that information, it can go and fetch it for you. Okay, it does not store the whole copy. In other words, all the libraries do not have information about all the books that is stored in any library that they are a part of. What they do is they store complete information about their own library, and then they have partial information as to the searches, and then once a search takes place, then they can pull up the record from the other library's database and then actually show it to you on the screen, from which you can perform activity. So going further, a global catalog server stores a full copy of all objects in the directory for its host domain. So for benandbrady.com domain, the global catalog will store all the information for that domain, and a partial copy of all objects for all other domains in the forest. This storage strategy provides efficient searches without unnecessary referrals to other domain controllers. So one of the major reasons why a global catalog is created is so that your searches will go faster. Your searches should not cross the WAN connection. If you would like to search for something, it should be done locally. If it cannot find it, global catalog will send a referral, find that information very quickly for you so that you can actually use that particular object. And now by definition or by default, the first domain controller in the forest automatically becomes a global catalog server. So the global catalog is simply an index of items stored in the Active Directory so that your searches actually go faster. Here, let's take another example. Let's say that you would like to find a definition of a term in a book. Let's say that you're trying to find a definition of the word schema in an Active Directory book. Well, one of the ways you can find where the word schema is used throughout the book is by turning page to page. In other words, you go to page 1, page 2, page 3, and then finally find all the word schema. You're basically reading the whole book, and then hopefully you'll find what you need very soon. Or what you can do is turn to the back of the book in which there is an index and then find the word schema. And that index will clearly point to page, for example, 325, 327, and then 699. All right, so now you can turn to those pages directly, read about the information on the schema, and you will get to find out exactly what you need to know about schema, at least the information that is stored in that particular book. If the information is not available in the book, remember the book is a physical object. This database can span different books also. You can also have a reference saying that, you know what, besides these 3 pages, well, here's another book, maybe you should check out the following pages in that book as well. And now sitting in that book itself, you can make a connection to the other book and then look up the reference topics over there as well. This becomes an electronic catalog. In fact, that's exactly what a global catalog is, hence the word catalog. And the word global basically means that it has information about all the domains in the forest that it is servicing. So how do you set up a global catalog? What we're going to do is minimize this and go back to DC1 and start Active Directory sites and services. And in there, this time what we will do is, and I know this may be a little bit confusing depending on where you click. There are different objects and they're available if you click at the right place. So for example, if I want to set up a Bridgehead server, I click on a server, right click, and then go to properties, and then the Bridgehead server information was over here. However, I cannot set up the global catalog from here. To set up the global catalog, you need to click on the NTDS settings link. And I'll try to show you some logic as to where you're clicking to find the objects. I'm going to right click on this. After all, you're trying to set up the settings of the Active Directory itself, not of the server. So you right click on the NTDS settings, go to properties, and here's a checkbox. Now in our benandbrady.com domain, DC1 was set up as the first domain controller, hence it is set up as a global catalog automatically over here for us. So I'm going to close this connection, and then let's check the same thing out on DC2. Go to NTDS settings, right click, properties, and then here we go. It is not a global catalog. And then go to DC3 over here, and then again this should not be a global catalog as well. So we have one global catalog, and let's formulate a strategy as to how many global catalogs to have and where should you set up the next global catalog. So my global catalog currently is on DC1 over here. All the users in the California site, when they want to search for an object that does not exist over here, exists in a different domain, or it exists in a different place in a different site, what will happen is that they will refer to this particular global catalog on DC1, and then the searches will go faster. However, users on the North Carolina site, if they were to perform a search and for some reason DC3 was not able to give that information to them, what will happen is their search will now actually have to connect to the global catalog over here, and then this global catalog will answer the query will come back, and then the user over here will know exactly about will get the information that this person was searching for. So not a good idea. Wouldn't you rather have a global catalog over here as well, so that the searches are performed locally, and then these two global catalogs, yes, guess what, they will participate in the global catalog replication traffic as well. So what you need to do is set up a global catalog on each site so that replication takes place faster. Now global catalog is not just for site for searches only. There are other reasons also why you set up a global catalog, and let's go through that. Here are the reasons why you set up global catalog. One of the reasons is for the group for the universal group membership information. In other words, once you create a universal group, what happens is that information about the members of the universal group is stored in the global catalog directly, so that this information is available to the user when the user logs on. So when a user logs on, it wants to find out the different groups or the different universal groups that the user belongs to. It has to actually contact the global catalog to find out the universal groups in which this user belongs. In that case, what will happen is, in this particular example, when the user logs on in this network, to find out the universal groups that the user belongs to, it will have to actually make a connection to DC1, find out that information, because the global catalog currently is on DC1, and then the user will know exactly what universal groups they belong to. So again, it is a good idea to set up DC3 over here, simply because the global catalog is the location where the universal group membership is actually stored. This brings me to a question in the exam also. They recommend that what you do is, if you're going to set up universal group memberships, do not add users directly to the universal group. In other words, let's say that there is a universal group called finance. Do not add users Fin1, Fin2, Fin3, Jill and Jack and so forth to the group called universal group directly. What you do instead is, these 100 users, organize them into one or more groups. So let's say the 100 users can be organized into 2 groups. finance employees and finance managers. And those two groups then you should put in, those two will be the global groups, by the way. Those two global groups then you put in the universal group. In that manner, universal groups will have 2 objects and not 100 objects, so that when the global catalogs participate in the replication process, they only have to replicate 2 objects and not the 100 objects, which are the users that you would have that they would have to replicate had you added them directly to the universal group. So once again, if you're going to add users to a universal group, they recommend that you add users to the global groups first, so that you have a few global groups and then add the global groups to the universal groups. So that is one of the reasons why a global catalog is created. The second reason is so that it can find information about of the Active Directory regardless of which domain or forest this Active Directory is. And last but not the least, it is also used for UPN logins. UPN is the username that is defined as, for example, jsmith@benandbrady.com. You can also log in using UPN names onto a domain. If a user is using UPN names to log in, well, they do need the presence of a global catalog before they can be logged into the domain. So for these 3 reasons, you need to create a global catalog at each site. So what we're going to now do is, we are going to go to Active Directory Site and Services on DC1, and then go to our North Carolina site, and over there, right click on the NTDS settings, go to Properties, and then over there, set this one up as the global catalog. So now we have 2 global catalogs in our domain. One global catalog is on DC1, which was set up by default, and this is going to service the computers in the California site. And then the second global catalog is on DC3, which we just set up, and this will service the computers in the North Carolina site. And any changes taking place to the global catalog in any of these 2 locations will be replicated, and this replication is controlled by the knowledge consistency checker one more time. So I'm going to minimize this, and I think at this point we have covered all the topics that I wanted to in this particular video. Let's have a review one more time of what we have done. We were trying to actually control the replication between our sites, and in order to do that, we created and configured the site links. We also created a backup link, and then we configured the different parameters of these links, namely the cost of the link, the replication interval, and then we also scheduled when the replication between the 2 sites will take place. What we learned in the process was that there are 2 types of replications, intrasite and intersite, and then intersite can be scheduled. Intrasite is not you're not able to schedule an intrasite replication. It takes place automatically every 15 minutes. Now, to optimize the network even further, we did 2 other things. We created Bridgehead servers. This is a server that participates in the replication process between 2 sites. We also created global catalogs so that the searches go more efficiently. And finally, as optional steps, we created site-link bridges so that we have a fault-tolerant method of actually replicating if in case one link goes down. And I also showed you how to create connection objects in case knowledge consistency checker did not create the objects or did not create the objects to your satisfaction. I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you very soon in a different video in Active Directory.